You and me are on a mission to read through and understand the Bible. This is the Steve Cayley Show. Before we start, I just want to say thank you to our sponsors, Paramount Prizes. Paramount Prizes are an online competition website, one of the best in the country. Get yourselves to paramountprizes.co.uk for some absolute bargains. And Graham's Windows and Doors at grahamswindowsanddoors.co.uk, Yeovil's finest purveyor of windows, doors and conservatories. That's Graham's Windows and Doors and Paramount Prizes. Thank you guys, we really appreciate your support. Now, on with the show. Now, this is episode 4, I believe, and we're not going to move much further on this time. We will be exploring the Tower of Babel, that's where we're at in the Genesis story. But there's also a few other things that I want to explore and talk about because I'm reading the Bible, I'm exploring God and Jesus and Christianity and religion and faith in general, and my mind is buzzing with a million questions about it all, and there's some things I want to talk about, specifically the Shroud of Turin. If it turns out the Shroud of Turin is what it is and is real, and that is Jesus that we can see on the Shroud of Turin, what does that mean? I want to explore that, and I want to go over a few things from last week that I just want to highlight and reiterate. So we're exploring the Bible, we're learning, and I want to say right at the top here that I'm not here to disparage the Bible, disparage anyone's faith. I'm coming at this from a totally open-minded point of view. I want to learn, I want to understand it. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's start with the Tower of Babel, shall we? I'll read the Tower of Babel. It's only a short passage. Think about what it means, and then I want to move on to some other bits and pieces. We were going to do the start of Abraham's story, but I'm going to save that till next week because it's very complicated. Abraham's a very complicated figure, but a very important figure, and I want to do his story and his character justice in this. Okay, so here's the Tower of Babel. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As men moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick mortar instead of stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches towards the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down. What tickles me about this story is I don't get it. I don't think if you understand what the Tower of Babel is supposed to be, what the meaning behind it is, what God is doing here, then please leave it in the comments, because it is funny. It is like mankind is like, hey, let's do this thing. Let's show how great we are. I suppose this story is God's way of, I don't know, maybe chastising hubris, I suppose, but why would he want to impede the progress of humanity in this way unless he was unhappy with the direction it was going? I don't know. Let me continue the story. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the men were building, and the Lord said, "If, as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." Also, who is he talking to there? God says, "Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." Is he talking to the reader? I don't know. That's an interesting one. Who do you think God is talking to there? The narrator, the reader, an angel or something perhaps? Maybe it's revealed. Let's just keep reading on. So the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world, and from there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. What on earth is going on there? I don't know. This is a part of the story I don't really understand. Let's explore it, shall we, together? God wants to... Why would he want to impede the progress of humanity doing something like this? Maybe he thought that it was undeserved self-congratulation. Maybe he didn't like the idea of humanity spiraling down a different path where perhaps they don't need God so much? Is this human becoming God? Is this the beginning of what Nietzsche would later say was the death of God? Man taking his destiny and his progress into his own hands, maybe, and God was trying to subvert that. I don't know. I have no idea. It's a really interesting story. I want to know your thoughts. And I appreciate, I received some comments about the last episode, and a lot of those comments were like, man, you sounded really depressed. You sounded really depressed. You're very serious in that episode. Yes, I was. I was very depressed. I was, I've spoken about it a few times. Part of the sort of lure of the Bible right now is I'm going through some emotional turmoil and distress, and and I really wasn't winning the war last week when I decided to dive into the story, into the Bible. But I'm feeling much cheerier today, if anyone's interested. So let's leave the Tower of Babel there. I will explore next episode. I'll investigate what the prevailing thoughts are around the point of the story of the Tower of Babel, okay? And then we'll reevaluate it and reanalyze it. And I want to know your thoughts. I will include your thoughts, dear listener, in the episode if you care to comment. Now, let's move on a little bit. There's a point that I really wanted to highlight from our previous episode, Noah and the Flood. There's a point I started to make and then was, tired and depressed and forgot to make it all the way to the end. I started to say that religious folk, people who take the word of the Bible literally, and atheists, they make a mistake, I think, when it comes to the story of Noah and the flood and the rest of the stories that we've come across so far in the Bible. Atheists attack the stories as if everybody who draws value from them is taking the stories literally, but I don't think that's the case. Atheists dismiss the Bible as if there isn't any lessons to be learned there, because every single story here, there is something to draw and extract from. Sometimes it takes a little bit of thought and musing, like the Tower of Babel. I need your help or a bit more time to figure out if there is any deeper meaning to it, what the levels of it are. But to dismiss the Bible like atheists do is a shame, because there is history here. There's lessons here. Even if you don't believe there's history here, which I think increasingly as the years roll by, we can see that they found this place which might be the palace of King David. We found this place which might prove that there was a flood. We found there is increasing evidence that there is key biblical sites that existed in real life. The more and more we discover and the more we dig and the more we learn about these biblical sites, the more these places exist. And there are kings and people who we know exist in the Bible. Like, for example, Jesus. You won't find many mainstream historians now that dispute that Jesus was a real man. And what does that mean? What are the implications of that? And I'll come back to that in a minute, hopefully, because that's the point I want to make today. So atheists lose a lot by not appreciating the Bible for what it is. It's our ancestors telling us stories from across a vast span of time. It's an insight into what these people were thinking, what they believed, what their day-to-day lives were like, what their culture and civilization was like. It's fascinating. It's really interesting. It's a beautiful document. Whether or not you believe in any of the religious claims or the historicity of the Bible. Now, I believe that hardcore religious folk who believe every word of the Bible and believe that the Bible is, to be taken totally literally every step of the way, they're doing their own religion a disservice, in my opinion. And I'm sorry if that's harsh, but I'm trying to do this in defense of the Bible and what it is. If you can, how do I say this sort of in a way that is diplomatic and gentle? The Bible is a man-made library with beautiful and harrowing, as we discovered last week, stories that are compiled towards a single goal. Whether that goal is, I don't know, control of a culture or civilization, or to teach about Jesus, or to whatever it might be, whatever the aim of the Bible is, it's a man-made structure. I mean, even if you believe that it is the story of God, it is interpreted via the limited space of the human brain. Okay, it is people that wrote this. It is human beings that compiled it. It is human beings that wrote the stories and that wrote the Gospels. And it's fallible because it's human. You can see places where God has sort of slipped into a story where he otherwise needn't have been. The Noah one's a good example because there are flood stories, which are a story of a devastating flood without the intervention of God. And there are. I just don't think that your religiosity or the credibility of your religion is served by complete adherence to the text. That's just my opinion. If you disagree with that, then I totally understand, and I would love to hear what your thoughts on it are. But the lifespan of each person, was Adam 900 years old when he died? All these things are, you have to work hard to convince people of your religion's credibility. Not that you should feel, not that you have to. If you have to say, you have to believe, even before Genesis is complete, even before the Pentateuch is complete, you have to believe a dozen impossible things to then be able to say truthfully that you believe the Bible word for word is what happened, okay? Now, you can say, well, that's because we're human and mortal and we don't understand God and his power and his ways. Reasonable, totally understand that. But God is a very malleable character in this. It's not clear what God is. He seems to be jealous, and then he seems to be merciful, then he seems to be wrathful. Then he seems to be able to see the future. Like soon we'll see that God says to Abraham, soon your people will go to Egypt and be enslaved for 400 years or whatever it is. So how does he know that that's going to happen? And that's a series of events that he puts into place by pushing Abraham from his father's his father's homeland into this new place. That's a series of events that he puts into place. His flooding of the earth, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, is so mercurial and unusual that it must have been written to say to you and me, well, listen, look how fiery and destructive God is, and look how important it is that you abide by these rules or these structures, or look how important it is that you become a faithful man of God, like Noah, like Abraham. They are rewarded with great wealth and great personal gain because of their total belief and faith in me, God. So I don't know. So it's confusing. I hope none of that was offensive to anybody. I just trying to, what you're watching me do is think about this out loud. I don't have any preconceived opinions. I'm not set on anything. I'm just examining it as we go. Now, one more thing I would like to explore is the Shroud of Turin. For those of you that don't know, the Shroud of Turin is a beautiful artifact which is supposed to be the cloth that was placed on Jesus after he was brought down from the cross. After he brought down the cross, okay. So Jesus is taken off the cross. He has this cloth put on him, and for a while, and the cloth is stunning because you can see the outline of the wearer of the cloth, who, some believe is Jesus. You can see a man. You can see a man's body. You can see his forehead bleeding and scarred from the crown of thorns. You can see the blood from underneath his ribs where the Roman soldier stabbed him to make sure he was dead. You can see all of these wounds that were mentioned in the Gospels, and it is weird. It is really, 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 really weird, and it was sort of debunked a little bit in the late 70s, I think, because they did a test on it. They essentially, I think it's like some kind of carbon dating, where they, in the end, surmised that the cloth was a medieval sort of replica based on the age of the cloth that they examined. But recent studies and recent arguments seem to suggest that the cloth sample that they analysed would have been a rewoven bit of material, or a bit of material that's added to the shroud in the medieval era. So they didn't get a right sample from the cloth, which was which they assume to be older. Now, there's some wonderful videos on this. I'm not a scholar on this, but after diving into it for the last few days, I would say there is a good chance that the image you are seeing on the Shroud of Turin is Jesus Christ. In fact, it's looking more and more likely, with more and more research and more study into this thing. It's looking more and more likely that this is Jesus's burial cloth. Now, what does that mean? If that is true, if that's the case, what does that mean? So what it would mean to me is, so Jesus was real, which is already pretty established. Okay, and this is in academia and amongst historians. There doesn't seem to be too much doubt anymore that Jesus was a real man. This is just further evidence of that. So we know then that Jesus was crucified. We know then that there was people that cared enough to bury him and preserve the cloth post his death. So we know that much. If this is the case, everything I say from now on is operating under the assumption that the cloth is real, and it is Jesus's burial cloth. Okay, just because it helps me to phrase what I want to say. But I am in doubt about it, but it's looking more and more likely. If the Shroud of Turin is Jesus, then is Jesus' shroud, then we know for sure that the description of what happened to him is bang on. It is accurate. That is an accurate description written thousands of years ago by his disciples. They documented it perfectly. So then where do you go? You can say, well, then other things about his life must have been true. It's very unlikely that the Gospels would tell this one truth, which is the crucifixion, and then lie about everything else. So what else must be true? He must have been, he must have been a rabbi of sorts, because he was a sort of Jewish teacher. He must have wandered the land, and he must have preached, and he must have been trying to spread the messages that the Gospels tell us he was trying to spread. It might mean that the life and times of Jesus are much more accurately portrayed than we might think. So then do you say, well, that means every single miracle attributed to him was a lie? Every single one? Every single miracle? We now know there's some significant truths about this man, and the people at the time who followed him and wrote about him wrote a great deal about the stuff that he was able to achieve. Are all those achievements lies or embellishments in order to, I don't know, put a middle finger up to Judaism and help the fledgling religion of Christianity? I don't know. It means that at the very least, Jesus and his teachings were true. And there's a good chance that he at least thought he was dying for our sins. There's a good chance that Jesus was this remarkable man. And we may know nothing else about him other than that, in that is what he seems to have been. Did he heal the sick? Who knows? But the resurrection is something that's debated a lot. And obviously, I've always thought total nonsense, the resurrection. But there are different sort of eyewitness accounts to all of these things. So I don't know. I just think, well, what do you think? Thank you for listening this long, by the way. This is longer than I thought, but these topics are also interesting. What do you think of the Shroud of Turin? And what do you think that tells us about Jesus? Because that is a sort of man that deserves a religion. That is something that we should revere if these things about him are true, if that is how he died. And it's a perfect description of his death in the Gospels. Then we must assume that other things about him are true. The mortal things about him are true. The other thing about the Shroud of Turin that's interesting is, I always thought that the Shroud of Turin, the outline that you see of Jesus, was caused by blood. But actually, it seems to be like a strange photonegative, as if when the shroud was put over his body, there was some kind of expulsion or emission of light that forever imprinted Jesus' likeness onto this cloth. And no one, as far as I can see, has been able to explain just what the hell that is. And, people, the religious, think that's the expulsion of divine light exploding from Jesus' body. And that's why his image is perfectly encapsulated in the cloth like that, because I don't know. That's some kind of divine energy being expelled from him upon his death. I don't know, but no one can say for sure it isn't that at the moment. It just seems unlikely because our hands are tied by a specific scientific vocabulary. If any of this, if none of this makes sense, I'm sorry. I'm literally just thinking out loud, and I'd like you to help I'd like you to help sculpt and shape my thought processes here, because it's interesting, isn't it? Isn't this fun? Anyway. Once again, thank you to Graham's Windows and Doors at grahamswindowsanddoors.co.uk and Paramount Prizes at paramountprizes.co.uk for sponsoring us. We love you guys. We're so grateful for everything that you do for us. We really appreciate it. Next week, we will start with the Abraham story. It's a little bit intimidating, to be honest. It's a big old story, and it's crucial to the three major religions on earth. He's such a pivotal figure, and I know the story, I understand the story, but I need to be able to relay it to you in a way that is clear that I've understood it, so you and I can explore it together. So wherever you are, listener, I really appreciate it. Thank you. I'm very grateful for you listening to this. If you did enjoy this, click the follow button, leave us a 5-star review, and listen to the other Steve Kayla Show stuff. We do a slightly sillier show alongside this, the normal Steve Kayla Show. This is just a sort of sub-series of it. But I'm really enjoying doing this. It's really scratching an itch that I've had for some time. So thank you for listening. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next week.